Hey.
Hey, Glenn.
Coded Jerd. Annie with you?
He should be in a little bit.
I got soup warming up there on the fire.
Oh, you're doing it old school now.
Yeah. So, can't go out to the post anymore.
What do you mean, go out to the post?
Well, the post at the back wasn't shut off at the same time as the post at the front because they're different accounts.
Oh.
And I could plug in over there.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing something about that. I thought you didn't want to talk about that specific thing.
Yeah, I didn't want to talk about it, but now they've shut it off. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. That's pretty cool that they would go out their way to...
Well, the cops that came looked very embarrassed. And the two guys from Hydro were there reading the sign that says, Hydro better get their act in order, or the Pineal Court will give them an eternal time to think about it. And the two guys from the cops were holding an envelope that said, we've come because there's this bill for $18,000. I said, yeah, it would take the rest of my life and another life after that for me to use up $18,000 worth of hydro. But, you know, in the old days, they used to call you guys coppers. But they got rid of the penny, and the replacement now calls you a loony. So I'm not surprised you're here doing a collection enforcement like the mafia, you know, for these crooks.
Yeah. The getaway drivers, right?
Yeah. They wanted to shut off the pumps that pump water from under the house. That's basically the reason they were here. Because water is the mode of transmission. Transmission is electromagnetism. Electromagnetism creates an electromagnetic field in which the human or any other living species is affected. And it is the basic problem, as I've told you before, is clumping of the glands. And when you clump things within the body, you cause physical problems such as heart attacks, lung cancer, cancer is a clumping, mental diseases, physical deformities. All of those things are the end product, and the ultimate is Alzheimer's. And every time you ask the medical profession what causes Alzheimer's, they say, we don't know yet. That's bullshit. They do know. It is used to shut down people who have an opinion different from theirs.
About the electromagnetism, I've been in like many neighborhoods, and I just trying to understand how it works. Neighborhoods that are like right next to railroad tracks, with those railroad tracks,
metal iron is the conductor of a locality which basically received it through water flowing on it, and that basically makes the recipe iron in gravel or railway tracks, I guess, to some extent, cables for electricity. All of that is a process through which an electromagnetic cloud is created. And if you want to understand it better, look up Michael Faraday in the 1800s, and he was the one who discovered the links. So since rocks, iron, and water have something to do with it, then you have to look at the foundation. What was the foundation made of? Is it concrete? Is there something in the concrete, such as rebar, for example? or there's other material in cement that can enhance it. All of that creates, if you feed electricity into it, as opposed to natural, you build up the magnetism to the point it leaves the site where it normally is, underground, and rises as a cloud. And what it does is it affects all technology, like what they call smart meters on hydro, and it makes it appear as if it's being used more than it is. And if you put a thermometer in a magnetic field, you'll see the temperature here it's in centigrade. Let's say in your place the temperature is 70 degrees, the meter may show 90 degrees. The thermometer, I should say, will show 90 degrees. And if you have a magnetic field and you park a vehicle in it, well, the starter in a vehicle is a magnetic switch, and your field can turn it off. It's competing with the magnetic switch of the battery and the starter and shuts it off. So you come and want to start your car, it won't start. You say, what's the matter? Can't start it. You have it towed to the garage, and they just jump the cable and tell you that it costs you $350. In a human being, usually the end product that it creates begins by sore feet, or sore toes. Then it moves to sore knees, then sore hips, and then into the stomach, into the spine, sore back. The end of moving up the body is the lungs, the heart, the brain, and ultimate Alzheimer's. Now, they knew that they could do this before the Ice Age. And it is in the voodoo religion created before the Ice Age that if you stick a pin in a doll, it'll hurt someone far away. Well, that's a story basically to explain to people who didn't understand that electricity even existed, that the way they do it is they add power to an existing magnetic source. And that existing magnetic source is underground, concrete, rocky, gravel, has RV in it, genetically engineered gravel. And what it does is it turns on that underground electricity to rise up above ground level. And if you remember 1789, the monarchs of Europe, especially France, ran the show. And everybody else was a slave to the system of supporting the monarchs. Well, the bureaucrats, because the poor people never have the wherewithal to revolt, the bureaucrats set up a phony court and guillotined thousands of people who supported the monarchs. That period lasted approximately 200 years. So you go from 1789 to 1989. I suggest a little earlier than that, maybe 1970. When it reached 1989, it became a period of transition. Now was the time to get rid of the bureaucrats in the same manner as bureaucrats got rid of monarchs, except using modern technology, you don't need to pull out the guillotine to chop the head off. What you have to do is create Alzheimer's. The head remains on the body, but it doesn't function. They know they made it. They know they pre-engineered it over the 200 years to do what they wanted done. But now, bureaucrats are a problem. Bureaucrats have taken over from politicians, and they've become the problem. So their shelf life expired. You got to figure out ways to get rid of them. War, pestilence, famine, disease. And included in that combination of things to start them all up is flood, tornadoes, floods, water flowing at a rate in which the land cannot absorb it. So over the last 5 years or so, we've got a whole process of waterlogging the land. Now, last week and the week before, they wanted to show exactly that they can control that, and they've been storing water in Lake Ontario, and they let go just the amount that would allow it to pass through the St. Lawrence Seaway. And everybody downstream of the St. Lawrence Seaway got flooded, including rivers backing up, like the Ottawa River and the Rideau River coming to Ottawa, backed up because they couldn't handle the water coming in the wrong direction, coming up the Ottawa River instead of going down the Ottawa River. And therefore, what happened is flooding across. Well, you visited the museum across the river. They call it the History Museum now. Used to be called Museum of Man, Museum of something.
Just recently I heard there was flooding in Montreal.
Yeah, Montreal got it, Toronto got it, Ottawa, in certain regions along the Rideau River, and across from Ottawa in the whole Gatineau region. Don't forget the word Gatineau, which is French, phonetically in English becomes gate in water. And if you go to Japan and you look at shrines in Japan, they'll have a shrine in a bay out in the water.
Yeah, the Shinto.
Shinto. No shit.
Yeah.
Backwards.
Yeah.
Or scrambled. Buddhism, this buds for you, is basically genetic engineering of the glands. So the insertion and the removal of glands in the DNA following death allows them to genetically engineer a new birth by artificial insemination that has more of what they want. So if copper policemen, for example, when they were first made, were people that had empathy for the people around, well, empathy is a problem in the cops they want now. So they took out the empathy and added in more of the glands for assholes, or what they call in Canada, loonies. They did it by representing it in the coins. They withdrew the penny, which, by the way, penny means virgin birth. You removed that and replaced it with a loonie, $1. And now you pay them $100,000 a year to be crazy, to follow instructions. not to care about the population, but only to care about their career, not understanding that they are as much the victim as the victims they create. The cell has told me that there is no repair mechanism. This is a process that took 200 years to put into place that exists today. And that means you have to get rid of them. So how do you get rid of control freaks? Well, most of them have jobs in places where there are rivers. Most of them in Canada is within 300 miles of the American border. What they showed over the last 2 weeks is they can flood water through the St. Lawrence enough to flood a whole bunch of people in Toronto, Gatineau, Montreal, all the way down to the Maritimes. Now, what happens if you allow more water than the St. Lawrence Seaway can handle? After all, it's only a mile across and 35 feet deep. Well, you create an inland tsunami off of the Great Lakes. And the way you do that is you send down electromagnetic charges to build a force field within the rocks below the northern Michigan Peninsula. And then you create an explosion underneath, and you follow it with a propane explosion, because there's also Superior Propane has their headquarters in that area. In the Great Lakes, Lake Superior, everything is linked to the word soup. And a combination of the explosion underneath and an inland tsunami across Lake Superior at the beginning forces the northern Michigan Peninsula to crumble and fall apart and pushes it downstream. Now, when you add the water of the Great Lakes into Lake Ontario, there is no way it can all get through the St. Lawrence Seaway. They've already shown they can, in fact, flood everything with the amount of water that does go through, but they could flood it in Canada. So any extra water that comes is for the U.S. That basically means Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, New York, Vermont, and all the way down through New York City to Washington, D.C. And there you have it. Millions of people will die whenever they give the word. And that's the problem. They can take over the properties in eastern Ontario that belong to senior, mostly farmers, and provide accommodation for people they want. Migrate to Canada before the flood kills all down there. Now, I got to go look at my soup. I don't want it to burn. I'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
My soup is ready. I don't know how I'm going to handle this. Might have to call me back.
All right.
Yeah. Why don't you give me 15 minutes to half an hour somewhere in there, and then call me back. Go through the same process when you're ringing.
Okay.
Okay, Jordan.
All right.
Hey.
Hey, Glenn.
Danny with you.
Hey, Glenn. How you doing?
Hi. I'm okay. I had my lunch, and I got it in even though it was a little too hot.
Oh, I tried to give you some time. So,
yeah, I know, but that's life. Better hot than frozen.
Yeah. True that.
One thing I was thinking about, Gerd, while I was eating my soup, I don't know if it was you or Danny, but I think it was you. I received from you a solar light with an on-off switch that you pulled a string to shut it down or turn it on. Do you remember that?
I think I got you that.
I think it was Danny.
Danny?
Yeah.
How much was that, Danny? You know? You remember?
I want to say 20, 30, something like that.
Okay. Sel asked me to give a message to the one who sent it. Anybody you speak to who wants to help should send me one of those.
All right.
The more of those, the better?
Yeah, it's basically to put around the backyard and keep the chickens and cats safe from weasels.
The one that I sent you, I think you said you put in the barn.
I put on the garage door.
Garage door, that's right. Yeah.
And it's been running ever since.
Okay.
So it's not too expensive for most people. And that would be helpful.
Okay.
Oh, I had a question before I forget.
Yep.
It might be nothing, but recently in the media, Trump, because he communicates to the public using the socials website called Twitter, and he posted something that the media were all talking about. Yeah. How he explained it was, I think it was like a typo or something. People were trying to figure out what he was saying. Yeah. People in the media was making fun of him. But the point was they were all talking about it, and it was a word that spelled COVEFEFE. And I wasn't sure if it was some type of code or something.
It is a code, and it was done for a reason. The supposed explanation is a misspelling of the word kerfuffle. And kerfuffle is a word they use when they really mean stir up shit. But they're not allowed to say that on radio. Stir the pot. Create a mess. While they're searching for that, they're not spending time on figuring out what he really is saying to other people who know their code better than the media.
Well, I think that whole narrative of, America being set up to be like the bad guy, so for when they destroy it, is like what's been in play. Because, I saw something recently, the guy Putin said something, and everybody sided with this guy like he was a truth sage or something, I don't know. And because he said, they were talking about, ISIS, and he's like, oh, America created them. And that's all part of that whole...
So it all stems out of the UN, and the UN has called upon the U.S. to handle all the problems around the world for a lot of time since World War II. And the purpose was to make sure that the money the U.S. would have to spend on a support structure if something were to happen in the U.S., such as an atomic bomb or major nature conservancy habit, whatever, warm winters, cold summers. And Trump knows about it. And by stopping payments to a whole bunch of things that are not the priority, they may be important in the long run, but if you're going to die tomorrow, have an ice cream bar. But he can't have an ice cream bar because there wouldn't be any money. So now what he's done is say, hey, what's most important to us is that we have first responders. So take 10% and add it to the defense budget and say, your job will be first responders if something happens. To do that, you have to get the money someplace, so you cut on a lot of programs, important as they may be, not as important as survival for the U.S. The media, being on the side of the UN, because they created it, don't want the U.S. to have the resources necessary to save their ass when time comes. And therefore, they're attacking. The Democrats know as well, and many of the Republicans know as well. So what Trump is doing is playing a role of buffoon, like we used to have in the days of monarchs. You always had a court jester, but the court jester was the smartest guy there, and he was the one reporting to the real boss what everybody else was saying around him, because as a court jester, they didn't care if he was around when they spoke, so he got to hear everything. He was a fool to them, but the most important thing is that he was the most intelligent person in the room. Dancers had another role. Dancers would, in fact, speak the code through actions in dancing in the court. So, although everybody thought he was the dancers, he, she were there to dance for the king, depending on his sexual alignment, they were there basically to pass information on to the king about what was going on in the area. So the king would have his fool come out and juggle or whatever, and then sit down, and then he would watch the dancer who would tell the story in dance code, ballet, for example, and then report back to the king. So those two groups of jester and dancer were the communications network. The jester would pass information from the king to his gang in the audience. Nobody else but them understood what was going on. And then the dancer would pass information from the audience to the king through the court jester. Question answered?
Yeah.
Okay. You should always write down the things you want to ask, because I have a tendency of needing to tell new people who might be listening more than you guys want to hear because you've heard it enough times. And you don't get to ask your question.
Yeah, I do that. Like the day, if a question pops up in my head, I'm thinking about something, I'll write them down. I think Dan, he does the same thing.
I basically have been programmed at the beginning to be part of the system, break my program, and become the equivalent of a court jester.
I see that.
Jennifer Dancer.
I
told you that Jennifer has been appointed a member of the cell. First,
no, I never heard that.
Agent number 27.
That's news to me.
First one is still alive.
I was born on the 27th.
You guys were mostly about 27 when we started talking.
Yeah.
If you look at the Desdemona typeface, there are 26 letters and 1. The extra letter is the letter S in its Latin form, which is slanted. In other words, shapeshift.
When did you find this out?
A year ago.
Oh.
That's why I said you don't ask questions, because I don't give you time.
Yeah.
And really, if it wasn't going to rain, I wouldn't be sitting here. Certain things I have to do indoors when it's raining, and we're expecting 4 days of rain in a row, so no solar activity.
So, Danny, do you have any questions you want to ask? Or?
I'm not sure exactly what you guys spoke about before I joined.
Well, he was like talking about.
So listen to the tape.
Yeah.
No, it started off like how they shut off the post and the back.
Yeah.
And then it went into like electromagnetism and pumping of cells, things of that nature.
Last night we had an event occur. Is that over the last 2 weeks, there's been an animal coming on site in the night and stealing chickens. First night, 2 chickens disappeared, and therefore there must have been 2 animals, because I doubt that one animal could eat a chicken in one meal and then go looking for a second. There must be a male-female kind of thing there, and I suspect it's a weasel. Then there was another one missing, and then another one missing. Every time they're missing, there's a clump of feathers, as they were kind of always walking around the backyard. So I started about a week ago picking up chickens that would let me and sticking them in the cat run. They can't get into the cat run because it's all wired up. So I managed to put away 5 out of about 15, a dozen, 15 that were walking around. The other ones got taken away one at a time through the first. And so last night, one of my lights came on, detector lights. And I happen to be facing in the right direction at the moment, because if I had not been facing, by the time you go and look, whatever caused the action is moved on to another space. And although I couldn't see clearly enough to define exactly what it was, worried that 2 foxes were in the neighborhood, I saw this animal walk through the shadows, and I said, that can't be a fox. It's too close to the ground. It has to be something else. I said, it must be a cat. Anyways, it kind of disappeared. The lights went. That was it for about half an hour. All of a sudden, I heard screaming from chickens that were inside the cat run, because there were no more other chickens left. I knew they were inside. So I went out looking, and I looked inside the cat run, and there was a whole bunch of feathers. I said, how the hell did he get in there? Whatever it was. And I looked at the chickens, and I counted 4. There were 1 missing. So I went back to bed trying to think of how could it get in, thinking, what could it have been that I saw? Well, it was not a fox because it wasn't tall enough, not a cat because it seemed to walk even like a cat that's sneaking up on something. And a cat wouldn't do that in the middle of the night going after a chicken. They don't even go after them. They ignore them when they're sitting right next to them. So I concluded that there were only 2 possibilities. One is a weasel, and the other one is some kind of snake. So all of that going through my mind when I went out to feed them this morning, I looked in there. 4 chickens that I had put 5 in there, and walked away shaking my head. Don't see any way they got in. Anyways, I went to feed the cats that are living in the cell motel. And on my way back, I happened to glance over at the chickens, and there's 5 chickens. I said, how can there be 5 chickens and a clump of feathers? And Jennifer said, it's a weasel. It could have stuck one leg into the wire mesh and kind of grabbed the chicken that's along the other side of the mesh, but of course can't pull it out or anything, and just got a clump of feathers. So that's probably what occurred, and that's what made me think about Danny's light would be perfect for setting up a network. So a weasel would have a partner. They would at times come 2 together, and that would explain 2 chickens missing on the first day, but Mama stays home, take care of the kids while Daddy goes out to hunt, or vice versa. That's what's been going on here. But chickens are a source of nourishment, laying eggs, and when they get old, they become food for the cats. They're important.
So, like, they get scared of, they don't like to be in the light. They like to, if there's a light, that'll deter them from...
Well, yeah, they are used to walking around in the dark and sneaking up on things. But if there's a light, then they don't enter that space because the chicken will see them from a distance and therefore get away from the edge.
Well, here might be an idea. I'm looking up weasels right now, and it says they glow purple under a black light, allegedly. It's because of the color of their fur. So maybe having, like a bulb set up in there, like a black light bulb that you could put in there.
Yeah. Except the one you sent me has no bulb. It's one of the
it's LED.
Little lights in there.
Oh, right. It's an LED. So maybe I have to look at the other style too.
Yeah.
I had a question about, as we're getting closer to 2020, do you think that they're going to be more truthful in their revelations as opposed to always presenting it in allegorical form? Or do you still think that they're going to be putting their spin on it as they're revealing what's going on as we get closer?
Well, what you have is competing forces. On the top end of the scale, you have Mother Superior making the soup on one side, otherwise known as God. On the other side, you've got creation making sure that the long-term plan beyond this plan is still operable and allowing certain things to happen, killing Mother Superior, killing her own people in a way that gets rid of them so they can introduce genetically engineered people for the next stage. Most people who are on God's side don't know that God's a bad boss and is in fact reaching one of the points shown in the Bible of needing cataclysmic events to occur on a regular basis in those places where they've introduced a genetically engineered population, most of them coming from Syria and Libya and other places in South Africa, where the nuns are basically in charge of genetically engineering the new breed. But you have a situation now where you've got a lot of people acting in our world as policemen, border guards, agents, such as the taxing agent or whatever, who's, according to Mother Superior, whose shelf life has expired. And you're going through a process of having guys like the president of Libya bombing his own people because he's been ordered to do it. And nobody on the outside comes to basically grab him by the neck and say, stop it. Because some of those and most of those leaders all know how the system really works, and what he's doing is the will of Mother Superior. So, on the other hand, a new group of people has been made in Libya and Syria and parts of Africa and what have you that are ready to take over, and they become refugees from whatever crisis is developing, and they, as refugees, get integrated into the populations so that they or their descendants, 4 generations, will be in a position to take over the jobs of the people who've been killed because their personalities don't fit the future. So that's basically what's going on. The people don't know if they were genetically engineered. They have no way of knowing because they were born as a baby. And their great-grandmother may have been genetically engineered. Their grandmother, born in a normal fashion, quote-unquote, however, carries the gene of the great-grandmother. She then passes it on to her daughter, who passes it on to her daughter. So that period of time, between 80 and 100 years, any one of those 4 can produce a sleeper cell child who then gets positioned by a gang in the government who know, for example, how to read DNA and say, yes, this person fits in the role we need for border guard. Or yes, this person fits as a surgeon. Or yes, this person fits as a tax collector. And over a period of time, they take over all the jobs of control. All of them have a trigger mechanism. And a trigger mechanism is to turn on a personality that they are not. And that explains serial rapists, mass murderers, all kinds of things, guys that cut people's heads off in a bus, that type of thing. And then they go back to being who they were. And they don't know why they did what they did. And the newspapers keep reporting, so-and-so lived next door. He was such a nice guy. But look what he did. They don't understand the mechanism of somebody who's genetically engineered. Walk into a theater, shoot people, get into a van and drive up the sidewalk, killing people. Didn't know why.
That's what happened just recently, the van thing, right? Is that what happened in London?
Yeah.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting how they always release the middle name, too, of those people?
Yeah.
That's
the code. It's to tell the people on side, this is our person.
So they, of course, they have, whenever they release the middle name, it's telling people that, but so...
Well, what they're supposed to do is listen for the middle name, go to the code manual, find the middle name, and see what it's expected to do by who the name was based on in the old days, whatever. And the most likely code book, not the only code book, mind you, but most likely is the Bible. Book of Ruth. Go and read what it says about Ruth, and that'll tell you who that person was. Married into the enemy camp, husband killed, moved in to devote herself to enemy husband's mother superior, and over time took on the role of making sure her mother-in-law was serviced with whatever her needs was that she could work for and supply and all that stuff. And everybody around was asking the question, why didn't she just go back to her own people? Well, because genetically she was programmed to be a nice person, 2, to have empathy, 3, to have respect, and went about doing what she was programmed to do. And the important thing about the name Ruth is number 2 is number 1. You're not reading the name in full because you're missing the first letter. As in seconds on a clock, you don't have a first. It's invisible, but everybody believes there must be a first before a second. Her name is Truth. She tells the truth. She does what is right, even though people may disagree with her, laugh at her. What's Donald Trump doing? Doing what he thinks is right. Trump, Truth, TRU. Trudeau, TRU. They have different opinions, but they both think they're right. And they may absolutely be. Trudeau may be right for the population of Canada and its genetically engineered people, where the U.S. may be perfectly all right for the U.S., who basically is in the eye shot of the people who want to get rid of them. You know, Russia may be working for the bureaucrats instead of for the leadership. And what would they do? Say, oh, we're working with the bureaucrats? No, they would say, we're working for Trump. So everybody would be pointing the finger at Trump, and that's what the media does.
All they ever do is, whenever I turn on the news, since the beginning, it's just, look at Trump, and it seemed like every interview with whatever public figure, they would try to turn the conversation to say something negative about Trump.
They want everybody to insult Trump.
Yeah.
Don't forget, media comes from the word medi. Medi, replace the E's with A's and de-scramble the word. It's Adam. Who does the Bible tell us was the first man? Adam. Who came second? Eve, the night before. Eve and Avi, genetically engineered. First of the genetically engineered, Avi. New avenue. V. Avenue. New way.
Ave Maria.
I got to do some things here, so unless you have any other questions that I can answer. I don't have all the answers. I have all the suspicions.
Well, I guess you got to do what you got to do. I'll be calling you again sometime in the future.
Same process.
Yeah, I'll have some questions.
Okay, write them down when you think about them.
All right.
Love you.
Glenn.